I'm going to start recording. When you think about what you are engaging in, when you're talking with people, whether they agree with you or whether you don't agree with them, or whether you are hearing somebody who has such a uh, driven, of a hardened belief in one side or the other about the Israel-Palestinian conflict, or just sort of Israel among the nations, like we're going to talk about today, that that you're able to not only bring knowledge, but then you can begin to kind of add your own feelings to it. And your feelings are what they are, right? Like it's not, this is not a class to say here's what you should feel when you're done with our learning. I mean, I hope that you walk away with our learning feeling more educated and more qualified to speak with people, whether it's your children, whether it's your kids' friends, whether it's the like crazy religious Zionist or the radical anti-Zionist, or whatever adjective that we describe for people. Um, and Audrey just said she keeps freezing. Am I freezing to you? Is anybody else being frozen? Because my reception here may not be as good as it is at home. So if I'm freezing in and out, then that's an issue. Audrey, okay? Are you there? She's frozen, so she needs to sign out in and out, or just go off screen. Which worst case scenario, I'll go off screen too if I'm freezing. Okay. But the idea that your feelings are about this are yours, and they're developed because of personal connections, your personal relationship, they're social, like what the community feels, they're what you read, they're from knowledge base. All of those kind of inputs really will kind of shape your thinking about everything. But in particular, this is the, as we're going to learn today, this is a very hotly contested subject on the global scene. And because it has that kind of presence in our lives, and you're gonna eventually see in the newspaper something that's related to Israel, knowing how you feel about it based on the knowledge that you've been given is ultimately the goal. Just to give you a sense, like, have you been watching the news? Because there's just yet another example of a horrible death that has occurred. I listened to the news, and it's very important that you also take away from what we've been discussing here. Terminology is extremely complicated, and it's sometimes used cavalierly, and you have to be careful. So for example, um, the city of Ariel is a huge settlement. There is a Jewish university there. A university doesn't just get simply set up when a bunch of people move to an area that's disputed territory and they take water and they take land resources. This is a 30-year community that has developed. There's a university there, there's hospitals there, there's all kinds of like social services and civics, governments and leadership things, and people live there and all that kind of stuff. And I've been to the place. And they called it on the news part of the occupied territories. So you would say, wait a minute, how is occupied territory? It's exclusively like under the domain of Israel. The Palestinians don't necessarily claim it as their own, even though they might, like, there's a debate about the land and it's part of the negotiation of the borders, right? It's not like it was ever particularly Palestinian land, and it doesn't bisect to Israel communities, to Palestinian communities, like some of the other problematic places. So the idea that there's this language out there in the news sphere that you have to translate before you can get to your opinion about it is important. But the other part of it is that here's a relatively well-settled Jewish settlement. I think there's tens of thousands of people that live there. I don't know the exact number, but tens of thousands. And a Palestinian aggressive person, went in and was attempting to stab people, and the Israeli military shot the person dead, right? We call it an act of terrorism. And the way that it's being translated in the news is, first of all, it's connected to the other string of violence that's happening in the moment. That the news was, this is the most amount of violence that Israel has seen in between the Israeli and the Palestinian community since 2006. And you know that there's a couple of other big forces moving at the same time, which is what we're going to be talking about today. One is 2 weeks ago now, a week, yeah, 2 weeks ago. Is that right? A week and a half ago. No, 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, there was an election, and a new prime minister took place. And that new prime minister has historically taken a harder line in its relationship with the Palestinian community. And if you haven't seen the news, but there's been a lot of extra violence, rocket fire and individual attacks, and the military has been escalating its response because its sovereignty is being threatened, if you will. So it's very problematic to watch it in the news and to know that it's a real issue. The other thing is what we're going to talk about today, which is that there was a draft nations. If you haven't seen it, we're going to read it today, which talks about the nature of occupation in the Israel and Palestinian territories. We're going to discuss it. We're going to see who voted in favor of it, who opposed it, and what it means for us to talk about. What does it mean for Israel to be on the national landscape? Okay. So, any quick questions, responses, reactions to where we're at? Let's jump in. Okay. I'm so excited. I really hope this works. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Yay! Hooray! New computer, new screens, new place. Mazel tov, shechianu. Okay. So first of all, from the book of Isaiah, we have this quote. You've heard this, okay? And he said, this is the mouth of the prophet. It is too slight a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Yaakov and to restore the preserve of Israel. Okay. So basically, it's not just enough that you guys are Jews. Here's the second part. I will also give you for a light to the nations, that my salvation may be to the end of the earth. Light to the nations. Israel among the nations. You've heard this phrase. It is or le goyim, light to the nations. So the book of Isaiah, right, which is thousands of years old, is already built into this message. Remember, this is a prophetic message of exile. And it says, you, Israel, you thought you were just a tribal entity or maybe a small national identity. You're going out into the world, and your purpose is not to be an isolated, ghettoized community in the world, but you are supposed to be a light unto the nations. And that imperative has really driven so much of what has identified the spirit and purpose of the Jewish people throughout the generations. But like, look at what's happening today. When you see the technologies or the fact that like the COVID vaccine, just most recently, the COVID vaccine was used in an accelerated basis in Israel because they were able to mobilize the people and vaccinate them faster and more efficiently than any other country on the planet. Why? Because they already have a military system. Why? Because they have a strong social network. But those things are not because it's just for Jews. It's because that was they were willing to be the test case. What do you do with 9 million people who need to be vaccinated? Plus, people who are living in an area next door that doesn't have access to resources. What is your responsibility to them? Oh boy, it's a great conversation. Light unto the nations. Okay, so here we have a little bit of our connection, the history of Israel's connection to the United Nations. This comes from Jewish Virtual Library. It's wonderful because Kofi Annan, who was considered a very strong proponent and supporter of Israel, despite the many, many examples of historical bias against Israel, Kofi Annan was, in some respect, probably the most amicable leader of I say that with chuckle because like it was still bad, right? Amicable leader of the United Nations during a very tumultuous time in Israel's history. Okay, so Sherry, would you like to read? You're the first on my screen.
In his speech to open the 61st General Assembly of the United Nations in September 2006, then Secretary General Kofi Annan admitted that Israel is often unfairly judged by the international body and its various organizations. On one side, supporters of Israel feel that it is harshly judged by standards that are not applied to its enemies. Annan said, and too often this is true, particularly in some UN bodies.
All right, so here we have, right, the Secretary General, Kofi Annan, very famous individual. It should be a very familiar name. I'll just say one parenthetical thing is that there is a cafe on the mount called Mount Bental, which is in the north. It's in the Golan Heights. It was a strategic military position that helped Israel secure the Golan Heights and defend against the Syrian attacks. And there's a coffee shop, and it's called Cafe Be'anan. Cafe Annan. right? So it is totally a play on Kofi Annan because there is also a place where UN peacekeepers are stationed because, you know, the conflict with Syria is still going on, just in case anybody didn't notice that happening. All right, can you read a little bit more?
Sure. Despite being the only democracy in the Middle East, Israel routinely faces more criticism and condemnation at the United Nations than any other country, including those that systematically kill their citizens or deny them the most basic of human rights. Even today, both the General Assembly and Security Council continue to pass one-sided resolutions that single out and condemn the Jewish state. Additionally, an overwhelmingly powerful bloc led by the Arab nations promotes a narrow and slanderous agenda meant to isolate Israel that has met little resistance.
So that last line is so interesting. Hold on to it because we're going to come back to something later. So when you talk about Israel among the nations, so Israel is in its mandate from the book of Isaiah is that we're supposed to be in the world, and our world is we're supposed to be light. Well, it sounds so far what we're reading, and Sherry, I didn't pick on you to read something yucky because I saw you shaking your head, but like you get it, right? Like the reality on the ground is that the United Nations has some kind of like disproportionate bias against Israel. Why? Well, that remains to be discovered and explored. Um, do you, Lauren, would you mind reading a little bit? Oh, you got to unmute.
The United Nations purchased 91.8 million worth of goods and services from Israel in 2015, more than double the 45 million purchased just 2 years prior. Medical
So
equipment.
just pause for a second. Pause for a second. You know that so you maybe you were reading the other paragraph on mute, but the other one is that Danny Danon is the first Israeli to head a permanent committee in 2016, meaning that Israel has been part of the United Nations, is accepted as an autonomous nation, an independent nation since 1947. Okay, so that's 53 plus 16, that is 69 years, 70 years it took, right? Which you would say, like, wow, that's a really long time. And then you would say, well, the Jewish people have been around for 2,000 years. You know, it's been many, many years as an autonomous body. What's 70 years? So depends on how you understand that. But he's largely supported and nothing to do, at least with the United Nations, the fact of him being a member of Israel, but the Arab nations did oppose. Okay, now go ahead, Lauren.
Okay, medical equipment made up the largest portion of these procurements at 29%, followed by 17.6 fuel lubricants and 17% IT and communications equipment, as well as various pieces of laboratory equipment, appliances, and electronics. Services purchased from Israel included management and administrative services, transportation, and storage. Israel ranks 40th out of 193 member states when it comes to selling goods and services to the United Nations.
So do you get what's going? Wait, what did you want to say, Lauren?
No, I was going to keep on reading, but you told me to
Yeah,
stop.
no, don't keep on reading. You did a great job, right? So, like, look, Israel. This is, I think, in 2017, right? So this is a little bit like dated. It's 5 years, but you can imagine that from in the 5 years between this article and today, that these numbers are even higher as far as its ranking, right? But there's 193 member states, okay? So Israel, when it started, was kind of considered a second world country because it didn't have major infrastructure. And when you're talking about some of the things that we talk about, which will come along a little later, right? U.S. support for Israel. Many of you grew up in a world where it said we have to invest in Israel, give money to Israel. Remember those pushkas? Give the little coins to Israel because you're there to support Israel. Well, here we are in 2022, and Israel not only ranks better than 40th among the nations, but its economy is so strong that it doesn't need that kind of investment. So if you hear Israel bonds, or like buy Israel bonds, right? Because you need to help build the state. Well, the state is built. We did it, right? But our support is not to build the state, but it is to sustain it. It's a different message. So and look at that. The United Nations is buying, in other words, the international body is buying this was just even in 2 years, double. Okay. And you'll notice that the economic partnerships continue to grow. Okay. Thank you very much. Jay, you feel like reading a little bit?
It was announced in February 2016 that Israel would be admitted as an official member of the UN Committee on Space Affairs. The UN Office of Space Affairs extended an invitation to the Israel Space Agency to cooperate on civilian space matters on February 3rd, 2016. Danny Danon, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, signed an agreement with the UN Women Group on October 13th, 2016. UN Women is the international organization's agency for the empowerment of women and promotion of gender equality. It has an annual budget of $307 million and is active in 93 countries worldwide. The agreement between Israel and the UN Women was compared to the establishment of diplomatic relations between two countries, and Israel hopes to assist UN Women in their mission to fight against domestic violence, advance gender equality and women's rights, and provide women with professional training as well as humanitarian and economic assistance.
Great, right? One more paragraph.
Following a petition from Danon, on October 31st, 2016, the United Nations cafeteria began offering kosher food options for their Jewish patrons in a small victory for Israel. United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon honored Danon's request, taking into consideration that the cafeteria already provided halal food for observant Muslims as well as vegetarian options.
Thank you very much. Okay, great. Roberta S., you feel like reading? I know it's a big it's a lot of article, and then we'll stop and discuss. but
Okay.
You're getting the flavor. This is a positive appraisal of Israel's relationship with the United Nations, even though we started with the negative. Keep going.
Speaking to the UN Security Council, United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon expressed his opinion that the UN has had a disproportionate focus on Israel that has foiled the ability of the UN to fulfill its role effectively. On December 17th, 2016, the Secretary General explained that decades of political maneuvering have created a disproportionate number of resolutions, reports, and committees against Israel.
Right. So basically, your last. So now we have a new Secretary General. His name is Gutierrez. Right. But you have the previous two are all saying something's not right. Actually, they're just acknowledging the truth. So just to be very clear, there is a truth here. This is not just an opinion. This is not just this is not an expression of victimhood, right? This is a factual account, and I'm going to show you the factual account towards the end of our study if you haven't already taken a look at the graphic, but the graphics show the truth, okay? You'll see what disproportionate means as we get down to it. Go ahead, continue.
The UN
Commission.
The UN Commission on the Status of Women adopted an Israeli resolution in March 2017 with the goal of combating workplace sexual harassment against women. Speaking at the plenary assembly of the World Jewish Congress in New York in April 2017, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres promised to act against a rising global tide of anti-Semitism and stated that a modern form of anti-Semitism is a denial of the right of the State of Israel to exist. Guterres reiterated this point to leaders from the Simon Wiesenthal Center during meetings at his office in New York in late May 2017. All 100 United States senators signed a letter to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on April 27, 2017, expressing their desire to ensure that Israel is treated neither better nor worse than any other UN member in good standing. The senators also called on Guterres to seek specific reforms to end the United Nations Security Council's imbalanced focus on Israel.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Hold on, let me just take this off the screen. And you get a sense of the rest of the article, which is, there's a pattern here. So I want you to see the pattern in this article is the secretaries of the United Nations, they tell you that there's a disproportionate treatment of Israel versus other nations. Then you see, how does Israel participate in the United Nations? And there's economic partnerships, which were strategic, from everything of like basic, resources like fuel to like the role of women, right? And serving on those kinds of commissions, right? And the fact that that we now have permanent representation is an acknowledgement that Israel is considered, even though there's some dispute about that, is still considered, I should say, an autonomous, independent state among the nations of the world. There's no question about that. Meanwhile, for many, many years, there's this undercurrent specifically motivated by what's called the Arab bloc, okay, which has changed as of 2020. The Arab bloc, which came out always politically and in some ways manipulatively to put a disproportionate number of resolutions in opposition to Israel, because that was the political force of the Arab bloc in the United Nations. Let me pause right there. So what are you seeing here? What's your reaction to what it is that we've got?
It seems like slowly but surely we're making progress. Slowly.
Okay. Yeah, right. Like, so on the one hand, it looks like it's getting better, right? If you talk about the fact that it took 70 years for Israel to be considered a viable partner in the United Nations permanent councils of, different aspects of the United Nations, that's progress, right? And maybe, maybe there was still like a little bit of that lingering tension from 1947 and 1948 when Israel declared independence, and it wasn't unilaterally supported, and it followed immediately with a war in which there's still a lingering dispute about the consequences of that war even till today. So that's one. What else?
There are
What else? Yeah, go ahead, Lena.
there are so many, what's the word I'm looking for? Policies against Israel. Your next chart. I don't understand why every year Israel becomes the laughing boy and they're whipped by the United Nations in whole. It is just so painful. The Palestinians say they're bad and everybody seems to stand up and agree with them. So I'm not sure that the United Nations is fair to Israel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So like the question of fairness, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Yeah, no, I was having a technical thing. I'm just trying to figure it out, and it's flashing things. So the question of fairness and the question of legitimacy is still there, even though there's like all these examples where it looks like we're participating. So what's going on there? And there's an issue that comes up in that last paragraph, which says if you deny the right of the state of Israel to exist, that is a definition of anti-Semitism. It's an interesting statement, right? You guys get that? I mean, we
Where is that?
I'll go back.
I got it.
It was in that last paragraph. All right. Any other comments? Interesting stuff, right? Yes? No? All right, let's go. Jay. Unmute.
Israel and Jews are also just so often involved in wonderful practices, with women, helping women, just doing good all the time. I mean, that's part of what we do in the UN, where maybe some other groups are so busy trying to rip us to shreds, but our energy goes into doing good.
Yeah, right. So maybe There's, Sherry read like the dark stuff at the beginning, and then did you guys see the pattern, right? Yeah, there's a disproportionate treatment of Jews from Kofi Annan. Yeah, there's a disproportionate treatment of Israel. Anthony Guterres, right, with letter of support from the United Senators, says Israel shouldn't be treated any differently than any other country on the planet, right? And then when we get to today, or what just happened yesterday in the news, you'll realize that that's still not quite the same. Okay, so let's go back. All right.
What happened yesterday?
I want, but we're going to get to it in a second. Okay. All right. So General Assembly votes on Israel versus the rest of the world. Okay. Just look at this wonderful graphic. In 2012, there were 22 resolutions related to Israel. Okay. Now, what this graphic doesn't tell you is for or against, just as related. And that's all you need to know, right? Like, you don't need to know for or against, although you can imply it's against. I think that's a fair implication. For the rest of the world, 4, 13, 21, 2014, 20, 2015, 20, 2016, 20, 2017, 21, 2000, and you see it up until 2020, 17. So 2020, oh wow, we're going down, but it's still 17, right? Which is the lowest since it's been. But look at it in comparison still, right? It's almost 3 times as much, sometimes 4. Okay.
It's 5.
Sometimes 5, right? Now, Linda, you happen to be the next person in my screen, so I'm glad that you're reading. All right. So this is what happened yesterday.
On November 11th?
Yeah.
The United Nations Decolonization Committee adopted a draft Palestinian resolution requesting an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on Israel's prolonged occupation. The resolution approved at UN headquarters in New York asked that the International Court of Justice urgently weigh in on Israel's prolonged occupation, settlement, and annexation of Palestinian territory, which it said were violating the Palestinians' right to self-determination. Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, areas that the Palestinians want for a state. In a 1967 Middle East war, US-sponsored negotiations stalled in 2014.
Okay. All right, great. So before we go further, this was
yesterday.
This was yesterday, and Reuters is a particular news service. It is not known for having pro-Israel slant in any form. It's often anti-Israel. However, this first paragraph seems to be just clearly reporting facts. Okay, there's a UN committee called the Decolonization Committee, right? And a resolution was approved in New York to ask the International Court of Justice, which is sort of the litigating arm of the United Nations, to weigh in on the prolonged occupation. Okay, so the occupation has been going on for a very, very, very long time, since 1967, if you want to argue, right? And there's been negotiations that has, most recently stalled in 2014. Okay, all right, go ahead one more time. Linda.
Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki said in a statement that 98 countries supported the resolution, 52 abstained, and 14 voted against it.
Stop right there. Stop right there. Stop right there. Okay, just see the numbers. Right. So here's the this is just yesterday, folks. Just yesterday, after Kofi Annan said that there's disproportionate bias, Ban Ki-moon said it, and Anthony Guterres accepted a resolution that said, treat Israel just like every other nation in the world. What happened was a statement said about decolonization, that 98 countries support the resolution. 98 out of the 193, 52 abstain, and 17 vote against. Okay. So meaning they're like, we don't want this resolution. We don't think that there should be any weighing in of the International Court of Justice on the occupation. Okay. So that's what's happening. There's a political football that's being thrown around, or hot potato, whatever metaphor that you like to use. And Israel did not win this one. Okay. 98, you know, 5 times.
Are
4 to
those
5 times.
mostly Arab countries and African countries? Who made up the 98?
All across the board. All across the board, including the Ukraine.
Yeah.
Including, is that what you're going to say, Al? Yeah, I'm sorry, Jay.
Yes.
Right, including Ukraine. So the Ukraine did it, including Bahrain. So Bahrain as well is one of the countries that signed the Abraham Accords. So maybe there's something going on, right? I mean, that's the issue. Maybe it's the wording of the statement. Maybe it's the fact that there's this, political block. And maybe, folks, we ought to realize that the United Nations doesn't have as much kind of like influence in the world the way that it could or ought to, right? Because one of the 17 nations that opposed it was the United States. And pretty much as long as the United States opposes something, it's not going to really easily go through. Okay. All right. Go ahead and read one more. Unless you're done. Yeah, read
No.
one more and then we'll be done. Israel's ambassador, UN ambassador Gilad Erdan.
Gilad Erdan said that by calling to involve the ICJ, the Palestinians are decimating any chances of reconciliation. Addressing the forum, he said, the Palestinians have rejected every single peace initiative, and now they embroil an external body with the excuse that the conflict has not been resolved. As the committee's meeting on Thursday, the U.S. Deputy Representative to the United States, which voted against the resolution, said that an ICJ advisory opinion is counterproductive and will only take the parties further away from the objective we all share of a negotiated two-state solution. The ICJ last weighed in on the conflict in 2004 when it ruled that the Israeli separation barrier was illegal. Israel disputes this.
Okay. So there's the International Criminal Court, which you might hear in the news, and there's the International Court of Justice. They're not the same. The International Criminal Court has also been quite actively involved in lodging allegations against Israel for committing war crimes. And that's another whole other story. And, and Israel as a international body is brought into focus with the International Criminal Court. The International Court of Justice only spoke in 2004 and said that the separation barrier was illegal. And Israel disputes this. And also, just to sort of understand something, if the desire is peace, the barrier, while there are complications with the bordering of it, which is what really was the basis of the dispute. If there was a dispute about the bordering, the facts on the ground are that the violence and the terrorism and the senseless murder that was taking place in 2000 to 2005 dropped precipitously because of the border, or this wall that was built. Jay.
Obviously, Israel's UN ambassador is a diplomat, and he has to be diplomatic. But I would just, words matter. And when he says towards the end of that paragraph, we all share a negotiated two-state solution. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if the Palestinians want a two-state solution, that they recognize that Israel can be a state next to them and live in peace, or they want us, destroyed and off the face of the earth. So
That's a really great point. You know, the point also behind it is when we say we all, right? Have you ever talked to somebody and they're like, you know, everybody really hated that show. And you're like, really? Everybody really hated it? Yeah, I was talking to so and so and they hated it. So it's everybody, right? Like we have a problem of plurals, right? It's like, you know, we're so good at math that we can discover calculations to determine the origins of the universe. But when it comes to talking about counting people and sort of like, I guess we seem to have a very hard time talking about what is the definition of everybody, right? And so this, you know, I agree on the one hand, and I would say, Jay, it goes on the other side too, right? That not every Israeli is interested in a two-state solution. And also, it's very important to say that there are a lot of Palestinians who do want a two-state solution. And it's very important that you hear from me that, and as I've said before in this class, and that we continue to articulate, that by and large, the borders for two states have been drawn. In other words, it's done. It's been done for years. And the reason that it hasn't happened yet is because of political will, because there's, you know, there are these attempts. That's what he's trying to come at. He's like, hey, how can we reconcile? How can we figure out these things when you just keep on doing this stuff? You know, and on the one hand, you're like, yeah, I get it. On the other hand, it sounds really almost immature from the side of the Israel ambassador. Maybe that's what you're picking up on as well, right? That like, I don't know if that's what you would have said, but I think that there's another side of this. It's just mudslinging. It's just another one picking up a piece of mud and throwing it the other way, as opposed to us saying, look, what he should have said, and you're right, is there's disputes. We want to reach a solution. I agree. I agree. Anything else at this point? Okay, let's read one more thing and then we'll take a quick break. So now, Alice, would you like to read for us? This is a letter from the Deputy U.S. Representative to the United Nations, written the day before this proposed draft resolution, urging the International Court of Justice to review the occupation of Israel. Okay, please go.
The United States firmly believes that Israelis and Palestinians deserve equal measures of freedom, dignity, security, and prosperity. A negotiated two-state solution remains the best way to ensure Israel's security and prosperity for the future and fulfill the Palestinians' desire for a state of their own. However, there are no shortcuts to statehood, which will only be achieved through direct negotiations between the parties. The United States continues to oppose the annual submission of the biased resolutions against Israel, which we are here to discuss. We reject measures that are not constructive and that seek to delegitimize Israel. The failure to acknowledge and the shared history of the Haram al-Sharif, Temple Mount, in these resolutions demonstrates they are intended only to denigrate and not to help achieve peace. As such, the United States is deeply concerned with some of the language in the Israeli Practices Resolution, notably the new language on a request for an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice, language that is highly problematic. We believe such an effort is counterproductive and will only take the parties further away from the objectives we all share of a negotiated two-state solution. Moreover, this language was inserted late in the negotiations into a semi-annual resolution of the Fourth Committee. This did not allow for sufficient consultation and is not the appropriate process for this type of request. The decades-old one-sided approach of the General Assembly towards the Middle East has failed to build trust and create a positive international environment conducive to achieving peace. This approach consumes limited time and diverts resources from other challenges we face around the world without bringing us any closer to a negotiated solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Okay, stop right there. Thank you very much. Right, so that's a lot. Let's just sort of, you know, digest what it is that we read. So here's a United States representative that says, look, the the best way forward is for us to have a negotiated, understood two-state solution. And here's kind of Jay, like, here's him saying the same thing. Everybody wants that. Everybody wants that, except maybe not everybody wants that. But we all understand that negotiating a two-state solution is the best path. Look at the way that he says it. It is the best way to ensure Israel's security and prosperity for the future and fulfill the Palestinians' desire for a state of their own. It's not diminishing one or the other. Everybody gets benefits from it, right? But there's no shortcut. So given that we are confronting a conflict in which it feels like there's a one-sided approach, but then our issue is that the United Nations as a majority, right? So even 52 abstained plus 17 only makes it 69, right? 69 versus 98. 69 versus 98 still is a minority, right? So even though a minority won't vote in support of Israel and the sort of bias that exists there, that does not say that there's going to be a better solution to a two-state solution by, somehow forcing Israel to change its behavior. Jay.
Before you arrived today, there was a discussion about someone trying to get someone to do something that's healthy for them. So they were coaxing, they were basically bribing. You can have a piece of chocolate or something if you do your exercises. And it just seems to me that since all these years, they've never signed, the Palestinians have never signed on the dotted line to live next to us in peace. How come all the countries, the Arab countries who give them money, can't say, let's end this already. We really want to live in peace next to Israel. We're going to give you the money and just sign on the dotted line. It's almost like, it feels like a couple marriage family therapy, and only one of the married people shows up.
Well, that and like, it's a great example, because then, what you need to do is you need to get a divorce, right? So that's the moment when a divorce happens. By the way, the United States has also put money on the table. Everybody's got money on the table. Palestinians, your problems will be solved if you say yes, right? And yet there isn't that solution. Barbara, then Sherry.
I don't believe that they ever really want to have this solved. They love how Israel gets slammed. The Jews get slammed. We are perceived as the evil people. If they accept a resolution and a two-state solution, then we won't be the bad guys anymore. We'll turn into the good guys. We give to the world. I want to ask you to this whatever. I just don't believe this will ever happen. I don't think there's any amount of chocolate. I don't think there's any amount of money that's going to lure any group, the Palestinians. I think they're backed by too many other countries that don't want us as a country at all. And I think that eventually, this is my personal opinion, the Arab population will overtake the Jewish population. And maybe it'll be 50 years, but I think that eventually Israel won't exist at all.
So I was interrupting, not because I didn't want you to say what you said, but I want you to think a little bit about the them and the they that you're using there, because we just finished a section of us like recognizing the complication of that language. So not that anything you said was wrong, but how would you say it differently without using us and them? How would you phrase what your statement was, which, by the way, last sentence that you added was, I think, on point. You're saying the Palestinians, there isn't a desire to do that, to achieve a resolution, and I don't think that's going to happen in our lifetime. Or you actually said as well, you that personally think that what's going to happen is that it's a waiting game, and in 50 years there will be there will just not be enough Israelis who will live in that land, right? Okay, so did you want to add anything? Would you change anything about the us and them? Because the reason why I want you to think about it
I
carefully
think the
is because,
majority of Palestinians are backed by other Arab countries and are helping to prevent the people that might want the two-state solution from occurring. How's that?
that's a
And
really,
the
really good
United
point.
Nations.
Yeah. Well,
And
maybe not.
Forget the United Nations. I just
No, they
think
pay the Palestinians millions of dollars a year. It was Noah Chisby's book, I think.
Well,
that-
sure, the United Nations refugee system has created a generation of refugees. We talked about this, right? So
Sure.
that is a globally sponsored program. Your dollars, right? Your dollars, which go to the American government, then go to the United Nations because we are partners in the United Nations and we pay a lot of money in addition to the money that the United States. Linda, the United States gives a lot of money to the Palestinian people. So you're right. If everybody just dried up their money, that might change the subject. Okay. But what we're revealing here is that it's a bit of a chess game. There's a little bit of chess going on. Sherry, you had your hand up and
Everything Barbara said,
Brenda,
it's just so frustrating.
yeah, good. It's frustrating. Do you have anything to add other than like, I can't believe we're reading this and it's got to change. Yeah, Roberta P. So here's the thing. The frustration is real. That's a big deal. The frustration is real. And that's an important thing to hold on to. This is not, I'm going to give you my opinion. This is not awaiting the announcement of Donald Trump running for the president a third time tomorrow. That might be frustrating to you. That might be frustrating for you to hear if you haven't heard it already. Okay. And that's a likelihood because if the news outlets are saying it's going to happen, right? That might be frustrating, but that's not what we're talking about here, right? I mean, the elections just proved that there is a solution to the problem. It could be better than it was for those who feel differently, but it changes. There's a change there. This is a frustration because it's intractable. That's our frustration. And we want to point to this finger, that finger, and this, and we want to say that them and this and all of that because we're trying to figure this out. But the frustration is it is totally intractable. Roberta P. then Jeannie.
I think we have to look at the difference between the leadership of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian people. I'm not totally convinced that if they had elected or not gone with such radical leaders, things would have been a whole lot better. I mean, if the people in Gaza trust Hamas, I mean, they're screwed basically. And I don't know about the PLO, are they?
No, the Palestinian Authority, believe
Yeah.
me, not super trusted.
Right.
That's part of the problem. You're right. That's another dimension of frustration is you say, okay, look, if we handle the money, then let's just say we give them $50 billion, that's a number that's been thrown on the table. $50 billion. All of a sudden you went from being a poor country to a not so poor country anymore, right? And it's going to provide all the resources for you to set up infrastructure and to set up the social structure and civic structure for you to govern yourselves as an independent nation. We've got all the money because we're sick and tired of watching you guys kill each other, right? We're willing to do that. But then you have the problem, you say, but what about the governments? And the reason there's no confidence is look at Hamas. In their charter, they're like, we want all of Israel to be wiped off the face of the map. And in the Palestinian Authority, it's a kleptocracy. They take the money, they have wonderful jets, and they're flying all over the world, and they're living extravagant and glorious lives while their people are starving, right? Because that's the way that people live in the world, not in uncivilized parts of the world, not just in Palestine. So the fact that those are things that are in existence is really complicated. It's frustrating. So thank you for adding that other dimension to our frustration. Doesn't make us feel any better, but it's true. Jeannie, did you have something to add?
I just wanted to mention, not to use a movie as a metaphor, but so one of my favorite movies is Princess Bride. And there's a character in that movie. Yeah,
Mine too.
that's so great. There's a character in that movie, I don't remember his name, but he spends the whole movie looking for the man who killed his father.
Yes, that's
And-
right. Inigo
and-
Montoya.
Yes, thank you.
Hello,
And
my
he's
name is
looking for
Inigo
the man-
Montoya.
The man with the 6 fingers, and the guy dies, and he says, what am I going to be now? My whole life has been spent with pursuing this man who killed my father. What am I now? Who am I? And the reason I'm mentioning this is because I think that we overlook the fact that so many years have been spent with the Palestinians taking on this persecution complex. And it's become who they are. And this is how they are manipulated, is that they believe that they are persecuted. And to change your mentality, it's not impossible, but it's not easy. And so I really think that there has to be, it's not just money. We think, oh, we just give enough. It's not money for some people. We have to figure out what do these people really need? And
Right.
it's not going to be the same as what we might need.
Right. And and the other side of it, that's also like a little bit about what Barbara was saying, which, hopefully you don't feel picked on, but we have to be very careful about our us and thems. Okay. And one of the things that sort of remains here underneath Roberta P, that all of this is education, right? Like we need to be teaching each other so that we can have a common language. So in other words, like, we could teach the facts on the ground that maybe the Israeli military didn't always treat their neighbors compassionately, and there's consequences to that, right? In other words, the feelings of victimhood may have some legitimacy to them. And then there's this other part, right, which says that, like, the Israelis are just colonizers, right? And if you grow up in that trope, then it's very hard for you to see it any differently. If that's like every time you go to a checkpoint, you have to wait hours upon end, right? Or you see every time somebody throw a rock and they get shot in the head, right? Like that feels like colonization. So it's very, very difficult for us to navigate through this. And the end of our class is not, it's not solving it. But the only thing that's in our class that should make you feel very, very confident is that you can now have the conversation. You know what the conversations are, and the things that I've hopefully been sharing you aren't just, it's not just pop culture. It's very easy to see what's in the news, and it's more important for you to be a nuanced, critical thinker about the situation. Okay. Any other comments for the moment? All right, everybody, let's take a little bit of a break. Just 5 minutes, right? It's 11:52. 3 to 5 minutes. Okay. Okay, so where are we? The Israeli-Palestinian situation. Fran, do you want to read?
The Israeli-Palestinian situation is one of the most discussed topics here at the UN. And each fall as this committee meets, many delegations dust off their talking points, reiterating the same messages they've delivered for years. It is time for all of us sitting here to get past our talking points and pay attention to what is actually transpiring in the region. In recent years, several countries signed the Abraham Accords and other normalization agreements with Israel. These would have seemed impossible even 5 years ago, but now we have government officials, business people, students, and tourists traveling between Israel and those states that have signed agreements, charting a new course of progress and opening new possibilities across the Middle East. The Negev Forum, for example, provides an opportunity to expand regional cooperation and integration to achieve shared security and prosperity. While negotiations were indirect and did not constitute normalization, Israel and Lebanon made the historic and difficult decision to demarcate a maritime boundary. Yet here in
Whoops, you got muted. Rand, somehow the mute jumped on.
We lost her.
Okay, I'm here
There
again.
you
Can
go.
you hear me?
Yep.
The General Assembly must take an honest look at this approach and consider alternatives. We encourage the General Assembly to look for a new way forward and abandon resolutions that are biased against Israel and distract from efforts to achieve peace. The United States is committed to supporting the path to a two-state solution through constructive measures. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman.
So, what do you take away from this letter? I see something significant that we need to take note of. What do you see? Jeannie?
Well, it looks
With
like
Barbara?
there's two different realities going on. One is there is progress being made, and the other is there seems to be mileage in keeping this conflict, going. And so, yeah, that's, I mean, we do see these important steps, and all along they say these countries are still trading with each other, they're still communicating, but they want the public to know. Again, it goes back to what I was saying before. We have to figure out what is it that what's the benefit of maintaining this conflict, this animosity that that permeates or overshadows the possibility of connecting and communicating and living in peace.
Absolutely, right. And it's it was such an interesting word that you used mileage, right? You said somehow it feels like there's mileage. And remember what we were studying before, the fact that there's been increased violence. There's been increased violence in Israel and the disputed territories, et cetera, et cetera. So there is some kind of like connection between the political maneuver and the physical or the aggressive violent maneuver, and that somehow that sort of dynamic is also at play, which we just have to pay attention to, and it makes it horrible. Like people are dying because of this, and so like the question is, if the rules on, or if the reality on the ground is different than it was even a few years ago, what's it going to take for everybody to pay attention to that reality? That, I think, is a really, really important question for us to hold. Audrey, and then Pam.
I was just going to say there's a lot of behind the scenes sort of things between people who technically aren't supposed to be talking and have no relationship. And obviously that's where the Abraham Accords, came from, is that everybody, that side of things, the Sunni side realized that there is a lot of economic benefits and a lot of benefits for having Israel on their side, especially with the Shiite side, especially Iran, riling things up and funneling lots and lots of money to Syria and the Hamas, as well as the parts of the West Bank. So there's that piece. Also, just going back a drop, I mean, Jared Kushner's theory was we throw lots of money at it and it'll get resolved. And clearly that wasn't the answer, because he tried that. He really thought, oh, well, now I'm going to solve it because it's all just money. And then, of course, you wonder why the Saudis paid him lots of money, but that's another question.
Right, and I would say, I would soften it a little bit, and I would say part of the next thing that we're going to study, the Abraham Accords, it is about the money. It's about the economy, right? And the reason that there's openness to sort of normalize relations with Israel, which we're going to read about in a minute, is because Israel has something to offer, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
right, Israel. The Arab nations weren't very interested in Jewish thinking. Right? It's not like what the Jews can offer to them with social development. That's a really good thing. Social, artistic, cultural, none of that, right? But money, but natural gas, right? But economic cooperation and a very prosperous society. There's a lot of talk around that. So in that sense, I don't think Jared Kushner. Yeah, I don't think it was totally, technology. I don't think Jared Kushner was that wrong in that respect. It's just that it's not the only thing. That's the issue here, right? Is that it's not the only thing. Pam, you have your hand raised.
I have to start by apologizing because I'm going to take us off track, I think. But
I'll bring us back.
thank you. All I keep thinking about in my mind is about the Black population in the US and how it took us, what, how many, over 200 years to have a Black president, and that they are also victimized. And we talked briefly before you came on about, well, we sort of didn't talk about it, but the Dave Chappelle thing on Saturday Night Live, and how I just keep thinking about parallels between how the Israelis and the Palestinians conflict, and what's going on in our country, separate and apart from all that. And there's so many characteristics that are the same with the victim and the good and the bad, and progress and regression. And anyway, I'm done babbling. Goodbye.
Thank you. Right. It's like, I will just acknowledge the point. The point is that even though we're talking about the Israel-Palestinian conflict, or Israel in the region, this is a global phenomenon, talking about all kinds of like communities, minority communities that feel displaced. And we talked about this, I believe it was last week. We were talking about the Women's March and the Black Lives Matter issues. And why is it that under the charters of those groups, there's this intersectionality, right? That like colonization over here is colonization over here. That white privilege over here is white privilege over there, right? And that sort of like attempt to kind of like whitewash the whole system. That's a really, really complicated thing that we're grappling with. I saw another hand floating around. Yeah, everybody's okay? Yeah, Fran and Alice.
I'm just so pessimistic because I'm just finishing the Hajj and reading hundreds and thousands of years of absolute indoctrination of hate and kill the Jews, and compare it to, the deep-seated racism here and many in the United States. That deep-seated racism in the Arab countries is not going away. They still teach their children to hate. I know I'm using they. I'm just so pessimistic about the deep-seated brainwashing that goes on, and we have parallels with the MAGA crowd. It's so deep-seated that no matter what facts or truths can be told, it doesn't seem to make any difference at all. So give me some optimism, other than seeing these nice words on paper in the hearts of a majority of Arabs. They have no interest in keeping the Jews alive.
This may not be satisfying, but the optimism is not yet.
Okay.
And in order to live in a world of not yet means that wherever there's an opportunity to make it better, we have an obligation to do it. So not maybe not right now, but there might be ways. Let me give you an example of a good one. Okay. And it came up in this last article. Don't overlook that Lebanon and Israel signed a maritime border treaty and agreement. No, there's not peace. No, we're not brothers and sisters loving each other. No, Hezbollah is not just waiting for the next opportunity to blow us up and wipe us off the face of the map. But this moved forward. Yes, maybe there was an economic benefit to it. By the way, I mean, it was pretty clear. It's also like Israel said, no, this is ours. And Lebanon said, no, this is ours. And Israel said, no, this is ours, but this is yours. And they said, okay. That was the nature of the argument. So it's not like everybody's happy about the outcomes, but there's an agreement. And the fact that there's an agreement shows us that there's promise. Wait, Alice and then Jay.
So while we were taking a break, I looked at my phone and I saw a headline that one of the missiles that Russia sent to Ukraine landed in Poland and killed 2 people.
Oh,
And yeah, and I'm wondering what kind of impact that's going to have on the UN, and how much the UN will look to Israel and their defense forces to now help in this conflict now that a UN country has been attacked. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
Right. So like, let's take it away. Like, where's the rest of the world when, you know, something bad happens to a NATO member? Right. So we have these like, you know, national treaties. So, you know, are we going to go? I mean, Alice, you're scaring me because you know what that means, right? Jay.
I forget who it was, but the person who was asking for some optimism.
Fran.
Yes. I never thought the Berlin Wall would come down in our
Yep.
lifetime. Also, I never thought that the situation in Ireland would ever get better.
Yeah.
That being said, I have also am very, very pessimistic about the Israeli-Arab situation.
That was the most Jewish response that I could have possibly heard anybody say today. Right? It's so funny. Like I was talking to these police officers, right? And man, they looking at me now. First of all, like, look at me. I don't look like the Jews that you think I look like, right? And then I was talking to them. I asked them about kosher, right? You guys know what kosher is, right? And they're all like, yeah. I mean, I asked a bunch of stuff and they didn't know. But kosher, they were like, yeah. I was like, it's totally in the common language what something is kosher or not kosher, right?
Oh.
So then I said, you know, it's like when you say it's kosher, it's almost like you're Jewish, right? And they were like, what? And I was like, yeah, I mean, the next time you're going to be chasing after a criminal and you're going to be like, oy vey, I can't catch up to him. I'm like, when you say oy vey, that was you being Jewish, right? And I was like, God forbid that our police officers say oy vey, you know, like Jewish police officers. Oy, oy, give up. But by the way, Jay, I mean, you're right. Like there's hope here, there's hope here. Perhaps that means that there's hope here. And it's okay to be pessimistic about that. But it's not okay to give up hope, Fran. It's not, you can't give up hope. And anybody else who's been feeling a little pessimistic about what we've been reading. All right, everybody's okay? Anybody, any other comments? We're good. Let's get to our last text of the day. A little optimism, Abraham Accords. Audrey, feel like reading? You have to unmute.
Okay,
There you
sorry about that. Abraham Accords Declaration. We, the undersigned, recognize the importance of maintaining and strengthening peace in the Middle East and around the world based on mutual understanding and coexistence, as well as respect for human dignity and freedom, including religious freedom. We encourage efforts to promote interfaith and intercultural dialogue to advance culture of peace among the three Abrahamic, Abrahamic religions and all humanity. We believe that the best way to address challenges is through cooperation and dialogue, that developing friendly relations among the states advances the interest of lasting peace in the Middle East and around the world. We seek tolerance and respect for every person in order to make the world a place where all can enjoy life of dignity and hope, no matter their race, faith, or ethnicity. We support science, art, medicine, and commerce to inspire humankind, maximize human potential, and bring nations closer together. We seek to end radicalization and and conflict to provide all children a better future. We pursue a vision of peace, security, and prosperity in the Middle East and around the world. In this spirit, we warmly welcome and are encouraged by the progress already made in establishing diplomatic relations between Israel and its neighbors in the region under the principles of the Abraham Accords. We are encouraged by the ongoing efforts to consolidate and expand such friendly relations based on shared interests and a shared commitment to a better future, from the U.S. Department website.
Right. So this is what the U.S. State Department, and if you look at all the documents, so by the way, if you're interested, you should go to the U.S. State Department website and you'll see all this wonderful information, and they have the particular agreements. I did a little bit of research and I didn't want to bring it to us in class. So the statement from, just to give you like some comparison, the statement from Bahrain was very simple and positive, right? We're cool. That's basically the short of their statement. And it was like 1 or 2 pages. the one with the United Arab Emirates, which is Dubai, right? And is like, you know, a major business, economic, thriving technological center on the planet, right? Very detailed descriptions of what their partnership means. And in the meantime, I mean, it's all about like it's opening diplomatic ties. Israelis are going to the UAE. The UAE is coming to Israel, and they're working together, right? I mean, like next thing you know, they're going to be like setting up companies, and having, you know, they'll have. I think there already are Israeli companies in the UAE, but now it's like totally legitimate and supported because there's technology, security, all kinds of things that they can share together. So the Abraham Accords, which happened in 2020, is the counterpoint that I thought was really great in the U.S. representative. His name is escaping me for a second. Let me get it. This is Richard Mills. Okay, Richard Mills's letter to the UN to say that you know there's a new narrative that's happening here, people, and you can't bring the old narrative back to the table. That's what I took away from that letter. We didn't, you know, we sort of skipped over to the next things, but like that is a very important piece of this conversation. It was kind of brought up in what we were discussing, but that is huge. That's what we're dealing with here. There's a different narrative. The facts on the ground are different. The pieces on the playing board are moving around. And you know what? It's good. It's good. That's the thing, Fran and Jay. It's good. It's good. Now, the one thing that hasn't changed, I mean, it's not an overnight, right? So here were 98 member states who voted against or voted for this resolution against Israel, right? 98 states did it. And it's ironic that the UAE would do it and Bahrain would do it because of their treatment of women. But yeah, right? It's happening. It's slowly but surely happening. All right, let's go to our last thing and then we'll call it a day. All right, so take a look at this. This is the graphic. Let me make it a little bit smaller so we can put it on screen. Can everybody see it? These are the countries that are condemned in UN Human Rights Council resolution since 2006. Okay, so from 2006 to 2020, let's just say 2022. It doesn't matter. I think it might be 2018, but like 2022, right? Take a look. Turkey, 0. Cuba, 0. Egypt, 0. Saudi Arabia, 0. All right, let's get to the ones that do get them. Right next to Syria, which is right now still embroiled in now an over decade-long civil war. It has had, since 2006, 37 resolutions in the United Nations. And Israel, just to get the point, 95. 95. What is it that we're seeing, people? This is the disproportionate treatment in a body that's considered to be the body of the nations of the world. What do we take from this? Do we say it's a terrible body? Roberta P., what do you say?
I see that the UN is a PR, a public relations organization. So these people who are voting for these resolutions can't, even if they want to work with Israel under the table and stuff, they can't come out outrightly and say, oh, we think this is a bad idea. I think that they are stuck, and so you almost have to say it's bad what's going on in the UN, but pay more attention to the Abraham Accords or the positive economic relations between Arab countries and Israel. You can't depend on the UN to give us any resolution, I don't think. That's what I think.
I would like to, it's wonderful. It's absolutely Spot on. Anybody else want to say something? So in case your mind didn't go to it, let your mind go to this. That is the same argument that could be applied to the divisiveness and rancor in the American political system right now. It's the same issue. So we would say, like, what's going on? And all of the angst that we feel. I mean, I saw somebody on Facebook, this is just sort of the world. And this is how people feel. When it was announced that the senator from Nevada that was elected was Democratic, the person posted all over Facebook hearts and claps and joy and like adulations and cheers, as if somehow there was some victory that was achieved by that. And you stop back for a second and you're like, well, I like the idea. Oh, so I agree with the achievement. Yay, hooray, right? But like tears streaming down your face to say, oh my God, we've preserved something here. There may be a little bit of very hard looking at ourselves in the mirror to say, that too is a little bit of a smoke and mirror public relations campaign. Because if we are to argue that the people who would otherwise may not agree with us, but feel compelled to vote against us, whatever the us is, right? That happens, that gives us a sense of like what we need to be focusing on here, Roberta P. So how do you talk to somebody who's like, Yahoo, the Democrat was elected to the Senate, and now at the very least until that Herschel Walker guy doesn't get voted in, because that Raphael Warnock guy is so much better, right? Like put the two against each other, like I'm not sure, but okay. So that's the fate of the future of the history of humanity is resting in the balance for that. Or you step back and you say, you know what, let's start paying attention to the stuff that really matters. You know what's interesting? I met with a congressman once. We were talking about education dollars for autism. And the congressman said, you have to know that the budget for the US government is largely spoken for. It's just like the budget of any other organization. If anybody's ever looked at a budget, primarily the budget is focused on one major thing, right? And in the world of the government, one could argue it's keeping the government functioning, right? So in other words, all of the money that is already sort of allocated through the budgets of the government is spoken for. And if you come with a cause, in order to persuade people to think differently about the cause, you're talking about a fraction of the overall need. This is the same thing I would say about Israel. It feels like this is for us the most consequential thing that's happening. I mean, certainly the statistics prove, look, 95 resolutions against Israel. That makes it feel like this is a consequence. And yet, seriously, how can you same time have that feeling that the Abraham Accords can happen if this is the greatest thing of consequence? The same thing is true in our own political environment. Pay attention to the things that are working. Pay attention to the places where people's needs are being met. Focus your energies on supporting those and try to avoid the stuff that just boils underneath your skin, because the less boiling that happens to you makes you a calmer and more competent and a more responsible citizen. That's the work that we have to do. Citizen of the United States and citizen of the world. Okay, my soapbox, I am stepping off of it. Any comments? I don't know if it's as big as a soapbox. I think it's more like a piece of paper. Look at my piece of paper. I'm one step higher. So, all right, folks. In that case, it's time for us to say goodbye for this week. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Just know that we will be, we're going to be meeting next Tuesday. Yes.